The Film Talk is brought to you by you, folks who listen and help out. Just go to patreon.com/the Film Talk for details. And now, on with the show.
Oh, folks, we're back. This is exciting. This is the second part of our two-part Oscar nominations 2024-2025 show. I'm Jed Lau.
I'm Gareth Higgins. The conversation never ends. This is the Film Talk, and being in the second part of a two-part thing is tremendously exciting because these days completion is a rarity. These days there's things you just want them to be finished. You just want to be able to say, this chapter's over, we're on to the next chapter. Dear listener, it's a small thing, but by the end of this episode, we will be done with the Oscars for 2025, or as Jed says, 24-25, because there is always that complexity when you're talking to people about the history of the Oscars. Which year do you mean? In case you know, when you say the 2025 ceremony, you're referring to the 2024 year. When you say the 1976 ceremony, you're referring to the 1975 year, and so on and so forth.
It's not that complicated. It's not. I feel like you're making it sound very complicated.
I've definitely been unjustly passed over in movie trivia for answering the question accurately according to the truth, but not according to what was on the card.
Okay, and clearly it still burns, but no worries, you're still here. It's a little reference to I'm still here. I hate to make a flippant joke about something with the terrible subject matter of that film, but we're going to start off with a film that maybe some might say is flippantly dealing with something that's very serious. We got 5 films. In the last show, we did Anora, Brutalist, The Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune 2, Dune, Part 2. This one we're doing Emilia Pérez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. And some of these we've talked about in other shows. So I may not feel the need to go on a late. I can just go back to an earlier episode. But Emilia Pérez is not one of those. I have no idea what you're going to say about this motion picture. It's very divided. Gareth, dear listeners, you know, there's that tradition sometimes where a film wins Best Picture and then time passes and people go, what were they thinking? Right? Films like The Greatest Show on Earth from the 50s, big influence on Spielberg. Films like Crash is probably the most famous example. People were saying, how could this win Best Picture? Green Book is another. Shakespeare in Love, beating Saving Private Ryan. Emilia Pérez is interesting to me because that backlash has actually already started before the films, before the actual Oscar night. And people are asking, how in God's green earth could Emilia Pérez be now? Can you imagine if Russ Meyer's Beyond the Valley of the Dolls got 13 Oscar nominations? I mean, I'm kind of be all for it. I'm not saying Emilia Pérez is bad. We're going to get to my thoughts in a second. But first, I am looking forward to grappling with your thoughts. Best Dr. Gareth Higgins on Emilia Pérez.
Well, Emilia Pérez is directed by Jacques Audiard, set in Mexico, although controversially was not shot there. It was shot in Europe for, financial tax reasons, and also I think that's the beginning of the controversy. The more important controversy is that it's a film about a cartel chief who undergoes gender confirmation surgery or gender reassignment surgery, depending on how you prefer to talk about that. And it's also a musical with extravagant dance numbers. Here's the thing about Emilia Pérez.
Yes, tell us.
I don't think that the film, I don't think it's a bad film.
Sure.
I don't think it's a great film.
Yeah.
I think it's an absolutely well-intended creative stretch, and
you are a nice man.
Definitely deserves points for originality. I've always been a fan of well choreographed dance numbers arising spontaneously in the middle of the street, and I've always been a fan of genre mashups. You know, as you know, I think it was actually one of your favorite films of recent years. One of my favorite films of recent years is Wonder Woman 1984, which is a satire on the kind of alpha masculine action movies of the 80s, and also a deeply romantic film about grief, love, loss, desire.
Yes.
And I think one of the reasons that a lot of people thought poorly of that film was they hadn't been taught to expect this matchup. It didn't fit within the parameters that they were expecting. So if you're going to watch Emilia Pérez, go in with an open mind. The more important controversy to me is the film does appear to imply that gender transition or gender confirmation is also a kind of a moral evolution, that a quote unquote bad person can become a good person by transitioning their gender. Now, I think that's actually quite an interesting idea. I think it's an interesting idea if you look at the question of if someone is not their true self, of course things are going to be out of whack in their life. And you don't have to have dealt with the oppression and the psychological pressure of being trans in a transphobic society in order to feel out of sorts with who you truly are and what the society around you looks like. When I was watching this film and I started to see, oh, they seem to be implying that this person who's done great evil, their gender transition is making them a nicer person. There was a part of me thinking, oh, I don't know about that. And then if I'm really honest, there have been times in my life where I became more of my true self, and I think I did become a nicer person. And where the film gets really honest is she regresses morally later in the movie. She actually does not stay. It's not a kind of a simplistic notion that, gender dysphoria, not a nice person, transition, totally nice person. And I received that quite well. I actually think that the film says some things about what it's like to face the consequences of your actions, the difference between how you treat strangers and how you treat your own family, things like that. The challenge that's arisen in terms of the offensive tweet that the lead actress, Carla Sofia Gascon, had published in the past is really sad, and another example of why another example of how our society is not yet capable of enacting a process of amends when someone is sincerely apologetic for mistakes they've made in the past. And in a strange, ironic sense, that's kind of what's also happening in the film, because the story of the film does not allow Emilia Pérez to be free. Now, Russ Meyer's a good analogy because it is as camp as all get out. It's as over the top as all get out. And I'm not going to second guess both the trans people who've expressed offense or discord with the film, or the Mexican people who've said that this is offensive to Mexicans because it wasn't shot there. At the end of the day, I still think it's an interesting film, and it's worth watching.
Well, Gareth, I agree with everything you've just said, which doesn't happen too often on the show. I think you're exactly right. But I do want to kind of explore a couple points. You talk about folks almost not being able to see what's in front of them because they don't quite have the context. And in Wonder Woman 84, if you're not picking up on what they're doing in the opening scene, which very clearly is like right out of Commando, it's shot in a mall. And, if you're versed in cinema history or had seen Commando, you would go, "Oh, I see what they're doing here." And I don't read reviews. I don't see trailers. I stay away from all film news, dear listeners. I leave that up to Professor Dr. Gareth Higgins. The reason I say this is because with Emilia Pérez, I was reminded of an old girlfriend of mine years ago when Chicago came out. It's got Catherine Zeta-Jones, among the big stars. She likes Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Renee Zellweger. Richard Gere.
It's got the guy from the Paul Thomas Anderson films, for Magnolia, the Cellophane Man.
John C. Reilly.
Okay. My point is, like this ex-girlfriend of mine, she and her mom, they went to the movies. They didn't know it was a musical. And they're not fans of movie musicals. So they had a miserable time. So I did not know that Emilia Pérez was a musical. Again, I leave it up to Gareth to look at all the film news, for me. Thank you so much for doing that, Dr. Gareth Higgins. He does it so I don't have to. So when it started, and I'm listening to Zoe Saldana's accent, and then she starts singing, I was like, oh no, is this a musical? And then the staging seemed so bad, and the lyrics were so clumsy, and the Spanish was so strange. I'm not a native Spanish speaker, but I do live in New Mexico. But so I can tell different accents. I thought, oh, you know what this is? This is like Springtime for Hitler. The camera's going to pull back, and we're in a fake movie musical because this is so poorly done. And then I realized that's not the case. And as the film goes on, we talk about the idea of good or bad taste. It seemed in such bad taste to deal with such weighty themes, the kind that Gareth just explicated, but also dealing with like disappearances and the horrible violence happening with the cartel drug trade. And the film seemed to have no psychological or philosophical depth with these matters. I began to question the notion of taste and trash. And the more it went on, I thought, what this reminds me of? This reminds me of the best of John Waters.
I was just going to say John Waters.
John Waters. Yep. It reminds me of, in Cry Baby and Hairspray, they deal with serious themes. And John Waters' films, which are fantastic, attack the very notion of taste. And I wondered, I bet John Waters loved this. And then I looked up, and it was on his top 10 for the year. And it's like, yeah, because it transcends the notion of good or bad taste. It just is. It's full-throated. Is it well done? I'll put it to you this way, dear listener. There's a scene about maybe an hour into it in which Zoe Saldana tells another character, tells the Emilia Pérez actually, tells her, oh, I'm Mexican. And I was shocked because with her accent, I thought she was like from Pittsburgh or something. And do we know, does the director speak Spanish? Because my Spanish isn't great, and I'm not talking difference here between like vosotros versus nosotros and how Spanish is spoken in Spain versus how it's spoken in Mexico. It's a different grammar. It just seems so clumsy. But in that clumsiness, if you accept it as almost a primitive work, then it's worth seeing. Does any of that make sense?
It does, and it may also be that sometimes the most quote unquote tasteful, the most intentionally tasteful presentations of suffering or of human extremes actually somehow diminishes it, because you can't truly portray suffering in something that's made for entertainment and take it seriously.
Unless it's Nickel Boys.
Well, that's interesting. We're
gonna get to what they do.
That in a moment, and I'm pretty confident there'll be people who'll watch this film who honestly will think about trans reality for the first time in their lives. And they'll think about it with some compassion and humanity. And there will certainly be people who think about the disappeared and murdered at the hands of the cartels. And they'll think about that in a humane and compassionate way for the first time in their lives. Actually, it left me feeling, and this is probably the last thing I'll say about Emilia Pérez, it left me feeling about the north of Ireland, where there still has not been to my mind,
a movie musical about the Troubles.
Well, here's the thing. West Side Story is a movie musical about gang violence. Yes. And both cinematic versions of that film treat the sorrow with respect. There has not been a fully successful, in terms of the, artistically and philosophically successful film about the Troubles. Kneecap actually came pretty close last year, and maybe we'll talk about Kneecap at some point in the future. I think there's some significant flaws in Kneecap, but where it succeeds better than many others. And frankly, when people ask me, what are the best films about the Troubles, there aren't any. There are good Irish films that speak about the subterranean realities of the power dynamics in Ireland, but don't take on the Troubles directly, and that way are a much better representation. I'd recommend Jim Sheridan's film The Field, which is set 50 years before the Troubles began, and actually has more to say about the Troubles than films that were set during that time period. So I'm not even sure
what about Elephant. Do you ever talk about Elephant?
Well, yeah, I mean, Elephant is Elephant is a different kind of film because it's almost like an art installation where, for listeners who haven't seen Elephants by Alan Clark, and it's really just a series of killings to show both the monstrosity and the mundanity, and that every life is equal. So yeah, it's an important film. It doesn't really tell you the story of the Troubles or the story of the power dynamics, and that's what I mean about there hasn't really been that film yet.
There was a movie musical about the Troubles. Would there be like the big show-stopping number where a character stands up and he's singing to himself, saying, "I'm troubled"? I don't know. How do we I mean, I'm using comedy to deal with pain. I'm dealing with the pain and the suffering of these horrible, inhumanity. But you could see it. I almost felt, again, the idea of trash. I almost felt like Emilia Pérez when you have the montage of the disappeared peoples. It's like we're kind of on that level. But that's Emilia Pérez. No. See it. Let's move on. What's the next picture?
We're doing this in alphabetical order, and we're moving toward I'm Still Here is a Brazilian film directed by Walter Salles, and it's a true story about Eunice Paiva and her husband, Rumides Paiva, who was disappeared by the military regime in Brazil in the 1970s, and disappeared is a euphemism for tortured, killed, and denied. And the film is about Eunice's experience of this unimaginable terror and loss, and what's different about it from films with similar topics like Costa Gavras's film Missing is that it focuses mostly on her domestic life, her life with her family, not so much on the kind of what you might call the thriller or the investigative elements of what she went through for decades afterwards, trying to get the regime and the representatives of the regime and the descendants of the representatives of the regime to admit what they'd done, but more about what it might be like to live with such titanic terror having visited you in your own home. Fernando Torres is the lead actor in this film. It's, for me, the great performance of the year, and it is the best of the 10 Best Picture nominees for me.
My goodness,
that's what it is.
This is a shocking twist, dear listeners.
I know, because I don't think I had not seen it. I had not seen it when we did our first of the two-part show. This is the Best Picture, and not the Best Picture of the year. It's the best of the 10 nominated pictures. It's so subtle
because Challengers is the Best Picture.
Challengers was not nominated. Yes, it's not the Best Picture. No, Joker's the Best Picture of the year.
Okay. Let's go back to
I'm the third Best Picture. Anyway, I'm Still Here.
Dear listeners, you're experiencing this exactly the same time I am. I am shocked to hear that Gareth says I'm Still Here is his. You think this is the Best Picture of the 10?
Yes.
That are not better than Honora, The Brutalist, and Nickel Boys. I'm Still Here. Don't get me wrong. You know what I'm Still Here is? It's fine.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that. It's a classic Jett. It's fine film.
It's fine. It is fine. It is fine. There's one good shot in it in which, as the mother is trying to rub the stench and horror of the jail off of her, we don't see her nude until we cut to the POV of her child. We can see her mom exposed and frail. And that's great. It's fine. If this is maybe the weakest out of the 10, if the old days you would have 5 pictures nominated for Best Picture. I don't see how this would make the cut, because you'd get Nora, The Brutalist, Nickel Boys, Wicked, and maybe, Dune 2 or Conclave, Complete Unknown. I am just shocked by this. It's a fine motion picture. It's the kind of middle brow, by the numbers. Sounds terrible, but like in a good way. Like, they're trying to get this message out. They're trying to appeal to a broad selection of folks. It's the kind of film that people complain not made anymore. That kind of middle brow picture, and that's fine. But it is there. I cried at the end. I got teary, not just at the excellence of the old age makeup, which is superb, but there is nothing about it that in this field of films like Nickel Boys, The Brutalist, and Nora that elevates it.
You know that in the last scene, it's not Fernando Torres playing the character.
Then I retract what I'm saying about that amazing old age makeup. It's gone down.
So my dear friend, right? I'm gonna strongly advocate for this film, because there are two scenes. You get the bulk of the film is set in the early 70s, and then there's a scene set, I think maybe 1996, and then a scene maybe another 10 or 15 years later. And in the penultimate scene, it's Fernando Torres with older age makeup. But in the very last scene, where she's the character's using a wheelchair and is so enveloped in dementia that she doesn't speak anymore, that's Fernando Torres' own mother, the great Brazilian actress Fernanda Montenegro, playing her.
Well, that's great.
That role. She doesn't need old age makeup. She doesn't need it.
That's great. It's like when you watch The Limey and they use shots of Terrence Stamp
from Poor Cow.
From Poor Cow. So that's great. No, I think that's great. But here's the thing. I'm just shocked at this, because the film is fine. It's well crafted. It's well made. I'm glad I saw it. I'd recommend the listeners out there to see it. But films like Nora and especially Nickel Boys are just on a different level in terms of filmmaking craft and also philosophical depth and nuance about the human condition. That's all I'm saying. It's great to see a story about holding together a familial domestic life. We think about the emotional and familial labor women have to go through unrecognized. And it's great to see that, and especially in that time too, there's these scenes where she can't get money out, right? Because their husband controlled all the finances. So it's well-meaning and succeeds. It's exactly what it wants to be. It's not saying it's a bad film. It's just not on the level of films that are elevating the cinematic art like Nora and Nickel Boys. If we're going to do this absurd exercise of saying one film is better than another, which is fundamentally absurd.
So, a tagline that we had for the old iteration of this show, when we didn't have to have the makeup that we wear now to de-age ourselves, was they agree to disagree. And I am so passionate about this film. I'm going to go one more round, and then we'll move to Nickel Boys. And I want to advocate that I'm Still Here is a much better, much more nuanced film than you're giving it credit for. We've never seen, I've certainly never seen, a portrayal of a person who, after they find out that their spouse has been killed and disappeared, that she is told by the representatives of the liberation movement, you can't tell anybody, including your children. And then she takes her children out for ice cream, which is it's a scene that mirrors a scene earlier in the film, which has shown the happiness of this family having ice cream in the same place. I've never seen a portrayal of a character having to hold the weight of that. As for there being only one good shot in this film,
well,
I'm going to suggest there's at least two other good shots. There's two other great shots. The sense of place in this film, the fact that their apartment or their house is so close to the beach, and then between the beach and their house is this road that we see military vehicles more and more ominously. In the early part of the film, we see more of them there, and there's this sense of creeping dread. And then the very end of the film, the coda to this film through the end credits is one of the most moving I've ever seen, where we see a camera just retreating from the empty house that they had to leave. And one of the things that marks this film out as a step above many similar films is there's no catharsis in it. That the end of this film, it's not a spoiler. If you read about Eunice Paiva's life, you'll discover that the Brazilian government eventually did acknowledge that her husband was dead. And in fact, on the day the Oscar nominations were announced, the story moved further still whenever the government acknowledged that he had likely been violently killed. It's not played for catharsis. You know, there's still mournfulness in that, and I think it honors the suffering of this character and people like her. And I hope you'll get another chance.
No,
Yeah,
it
I'm
does,
still here.
Gareth,
The best
you're
of the
totally right.
best picture nominees.
It does all that. It does exactly what it sets out to do. It's just filmic level, nowhere near in the same. If again, we're going to put things at high and low, which is absurd. This is the film you've seen this film. I feel like we get this film every 10 years or so. I've seen it a bunch of times, and it's well made. Hey, you're there at the hotel, okay, and you don't want to go out. You're not feeling good. Maybe you're under the weather. You got a cold. What's on the HBOs? Oh, I'm Still Here is on. I will watch this. Absolutely, go ahead and see that film. Again, I'm being flippant, and I feel terrible now because this is a film that deals with great human suffering, you know, in a more adult way than say Emilia Pérez. Nickel Boys, next one up. Nickel Boys. I'm still in shock, by the way. But anyway, let's move on to Nickel Boys.
Nickel Boys, another film that deals with great human suffering, and one would say advances the language of cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, cinema has always flirted with this idea of doing first person, right? Whereas you become the camera. The camera is me. I am a camera, as the famous title of the Russian experimental film from the early part of the 20th century is. I am a kino. I'm a camera. Orson Welles famously did not do Heart of Darkness. He was going to do a first-person version of Heart of Darkness before Citizen Kane was put into production. He abandoned even, you can see the storyboards were how he would explain in an opening monologue, basically to the audience, giving them some understanding of the grammar of what you're about to see, that the I, capital I, becomes the eyes, and the I in the human language becomes the I in the human body becomes the camera. Now, with that one, Heart of Darkness, I would love to have seen it, but I mean, Wells' great genius was in editing amongst of this variety of geniuses. It was great when I think was editing, so we would have lost that if the whole thing was set in first person perspective. And there's been, got that detective movie with Philip Marlowe, played by Alan Ladd, did a first person perspective thing. Nickel Boys is the most successful version of this I've ever seen, where we cut back and forth very cleverly between different characters. It also does become third person as well. You are enveloped in the life of these people. You know, before I went to see Nickel Boys, I saw it this morning. I walked by my kiddo Gavin, and he was in VR goggles, and he's standing in the living room waving his arms. You can't see me. He almost tripped over the cat Laszlo and the dog Fitzroy, but he is immersed. He is in this VR world, and Nickel Boys does all that, but without the added complexity of having a computer you have to wear on your face, where you are immersed in this world. After watching Nickel Boys, I felt transformed. I felt like it does what all great art does, which is it changes how you see the world. So after sitting there intensely staring through the lives of others, first person perspective in Nickel Boys, I now see the world differently, in my place in it. And in that way it succeeds as a piece of great artwork. You mentioned something like Elephant being shown in a gallery. This has that feeling. It's 4:3 aspect ratio, or roughly. That's not widescreen. You can imagine it being projected in a gallery, and it has some of the language of classic art films, but it changes my perspective. And that's why, again, not to downplay, you know, Gareth and I tease each other. Maybe I tease him more than he teases me. I apologize for being flippant, but I'm still here. But Nickel Boys impacted me so much that I wouldn't even put a very well done, successful motion picture like I'm Still Here in that league. I think it's a tremendous achievement. I think it does what novels have done for years, which is make you feel as if you are that person. And again, this is a story that deals with great injustice, systemic injustice.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you to speak to. It's directed by Mel Ross, and it's based on a novel by Colson Whitehead, who also wrote The Underground Railroad, which is. Have you seen the Underground Railroad series, Barry Jenkins series?
If I'm in a hotel room, I don't feel like going out. I love the weather. If it's a choice between I'm still here, I have not seen it, but I will see it.
Okay.
Was it directed by, again, no film knowledge. Was it directed by
Barry Jenkins?
Barry Jenkins?
Yes.
Moonlight.
And absolutely extraordinary. And Nickel Boys is absolutely extraordinary too. It's about one boy in particular, but two boys generally who are abducted effectively into a torture institution. What would be called a kind of a home for wayward boys. It's based on a real place, and it's about the torment they undergo and their friendship. And I'd like not to spoil this because I suspect it's likely to be the film that's been least seen of all the 12 nominees, because it hardly. I mean, I think it's an Amazon film.
There's 10 nominees, or
hardly got a. Did I not say 10?
You said 12.
Did I say 5? Okay, well, there should have been 12 because Joker and All We Imagine as Light should have
Challengers.
been nominated. Challengers is in a category of its own. So, it hardly got a theatrical release at all. And I also suspect because of the nature of it being different and feeling experimental, a lot of people will start it and switch it off after 5 or 10 minutes. I know that the dear listener of the Film Talk is much more discerning than that, and you will make it through to the end of Nickel Boys. But I don't want to spoil it. I do just want to say this: when you said earlier that it's first person and it parts when it's third person, what's astonishing to me about that section of the film that you're referring to is when you realize who the third person is, whose place you as the audience member are taking. And you don't know until very, very close to the very end of the film why we are at that point of the film. We're seeing the back of somebody's head, and we're watching. And then, I mean, I could almost cry right now to think about what the. I mean, yeah, how the film is. For me, as a white person and someone who's never experienced anything remotely like what the characters in this film are experiencing, the surprise privilege of being able to look back on the last few moments of that film and say to myself, oh, that is a tiny glimpse into an experience that I know nothing about. And I didn't even know I was having it at the time.
Yes.
That is the mark of a very special film indeed.
Yes.
And I can only imagine what someone who has more legitimacy to say that they identify with these characters might feel in watching it. It is a magnificent film.
But you're going with the I
don't think that Walter Salles or Ramel Ross are fighting with each other over whether or not which of their film about
systemic injustice,
courage in the face of systemic injustice is better. There's room for both Nickel Boys and I'm Still Here and Emilia Pérez. Shall we move on to?
Is there room for the substance for you? How about that?
It's very interesting, dear listener, because as you know, about I guess 15 years ago, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences changed their rules so that they could nominate up to 10 films as Best Picture. It's widely believed the reason they did that is because Christopher Nolan's film The Dark Knight, the second of his Batman trilogy, was not nominated as Best Picture, and so they expanded the parameters to allow a film like The Dark Knight to be nominated. And I think that's generally been a good thing because it has allowed for films like I'm Still Here and maybe The Brutalist and so on, and certainly Nickel Boys to be nominated as Best Picture. And the best thing about the Oscars for me has always been it can bring attention to films that would otherwise not be seen. The intriguing thing this year in the case of The Substance is they've clearly changed the rules to allow 9 films to be nominated and 1 Twilight Zone episode with all the deleted scenes put back in. because the
Oh,
substance
goodness.
is one of the best Twilight Zone episodes never made, and the 20 minutes of story and meaning in this film are really worth it. The film, for some reason, is 2 hours and 20 minutes long.
There's nothing wrong.
While
There's nothing wrong with a
while it has
stylistic exercise.
hold on. While its central performance from Demi Moore is fantastic, and Margaret Qualley as her, I don't know, alter ego, nemesis, twin best friend, greatest enemy is also fantastic. I really didn't feel that there was enough story to sustain much more than a 25-minute Twilight Zone episode. One caveat being the premise does give way to a surprise that I wasn't expecting. And that is the tension between the two characters at the heart of the substance. But here I am. I'm waxing about this film before we've even said what it's about. So, Jett, will you please tell us what is the substance about, despite the fact that it's not very good?
Oh my goodness. Okay, listen. Who amongst us has not imagined, dear listener, what Reanimator would be like if you had Demi Moore instead of Barbara Crampton? And I love Barbara Crampton. Don't get me wrong. I follow her on Threads. What's the substance about? It's body horror, meaning what is the horror of being a woman whose body is objectified? You live in a society where you are a piece of meat to be ground up into a male capitalistic gaze. That's what the substance is about. It's worth watching, but if you don't like gore, it is very gory. If you like Reanimator and From Beyond, you'll love the substance. Go see it. That's my recommendation. Jett out.
Do you have a word for Dennis Quaid in the substance?
Not that great. I feel like, was he a last minute replacement? That's
for Ray Liotta.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense because, dear listener, it feels like possibly he did not have much time to think about how he was going to portray the character. So he came up with a couple of ideas and probably had to do it very quickly, would be my guess. And Dennis Quaid, I loved him in The Big Easy. Him, Ned Beatty, Elizabeth Barkley, is that her name? Wonderful film set in New Orleans.
Is it not
so much great?
I've never seen The Big Easy.
You should see it. It's great, especially if you love Ned Beatty too. It's great. So I feel like the Dennis Quaid maybe didn't have as much time as he needed.
Okay.
Probably doing the big press tour for Reagan or whatever. But
I've
always enjoyed him as an actor. But that aside, it is a cartoon-esque film, so his portrayal is cartoony. The substance, go see it. If you like Reanimator From Beyond. If you don't, then you don't need to see the substance.
Moving to the last film nominated for Best Picture this year, and that's a film that we did a whole big episode on. We were both delighted by, and we both the same problem with this film, and that is Wicked, or as it was called at the time, Wicked Part 1. Tell us about Wicked Part 1, Jett. What's right about it, and what's wrong with it?
What you got to do is you got to subscribe to the Film Talk. You can do it on Patreon, or you could do it on Apple or Spotify, or I think it's even on my YouTube channel. I don't think that gets any views because why would anybody go there? So I've said all I need to say about Wicked. I'm looking forward to Wicked, Part 2. What's it called? Wicked the End? Wicked the New Beginning?
Wicked for Good. What I'll say about Wicked was it's exhilarating enough that I'm delighted I saw it 3 times in a theater. It's probably the film that's closest to making me feel the way the original Superman did. It has 2 magnificent central performances in the form of Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. Great musical numbers, great set pieces, and the design of the tangible physical goods in the film, put it that way, or the things that are intended to look like tangible physical goods, is pretty great. And there's a real problem in how the thing looks. It may look better at home. I'm sure, Jett, as you've said before, there will be people who tweak it, try to change the way the color of the thing looks, because for some reason they really messed up how the color of this film looks. It
Well,
doesn't
it was
look.
intentional. These were intentional
They,
color grading
they
choices,
and
but you know,
it was
lighting
it was
choices.
inadvertent errors. The place where it looks the best is once they get to the Emerald City, particularly that long corridor going down to the wizard's lair. I really wish it looked a bit more real. Unfortunately, it looks plastic. That doesn't detract strongly enough from the story, the performances, and the joy of the thing. And I'm glad I can't remember literally anything about the time I went to see Wicked in the West End in London. I've seen the entire stage show. I have no memory of it at all. So I have no idea what happens in the second part later this year, which I'm sure we'll talk about come November.
Well, this has been interesting, Gareth. I got shocking news about I'm Still Here. You know, I want to say, can I just say one more thing? And I apologize for being flippant. It's just my way. You
Yes.
know, we think about films like I'm Still Here and Emilia Pérez and Nickel Boys that are dealing with systemic injustice, systemic horror, systemic cruelty. And we're living right now in a time in the United States in which people are rightly upset and they're rightly scared about what's going on in the country. And I wanted to end on a note of optimism. The other day, I do a variety of different things to our listeners, right? I work for a university and I do this and that. I was shooting a show that Ted Danson hosts. And the segment of the show was on petroglyphs. The deals was sort of preserved petroglyphs. And these are ancient, thousands, it could be 5,000, 10,000-year-old markings
Yes.
on rocks here in New Mexico. And I'd never been to this location before. Here's the thing. I've driven up and down this road in northern New Mexico. It's on the road to Taos, New Mexico, right before a little town called Taos, too big a word, a gas station with some homes at a winery called Velarde. I had gone back and forth hundreds of times over the decades. This is the first time I ever made a left across the Rio Grande right before you get to this little town of Velarde. And there was a property, maybe about 150 acres. Under lock and key, a family that owned it, donated to a preservation society. And there is where I was shooting this Ted Danson thing. Were thousands of petroglyphs. These are markings, some very intricate artwork, almost narrative stories carved into rocks. And they're thousands of years old. And you know what? They're still there.
Mm-hmm.
Those people still exist. They went through their trials and their tribulations, and their work still stands thousands of years later. And it's everywhere. You just got to make a left on that road that you've been traveling down all your life. And it filled me with a sense of great optimism. So I just wanted to, in the face of what's happening in the United States right now, what we're dealing with, films like I'm Still Here, Emilia Pérez, Nickel Boys, to deal with injustice, I just wanted to end on that. There's a clip of Martin Luther King in Nickel Boys where he says, "No lie can live forever. No lie can live forever." So there's reason for hope and optimism, dear listeners.
And what I'd like to, thank you for saying that. I'd like to kind of wrap up by, I mean, we do have to define between the two of us which film you think's gonna win, which film you think should win, and some films that weren't nominated at all. But looking at these, so many of them call forth compassion, empathy, and some of them even demand action. So I'll go through them again. I'll go through the titles one more time, and and let's see which we think is gonna win, which we think should win, and then what are some films that weren't nominated. So Anora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune 2, Emilia Pérez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. Jett, what do you think's gonna win?
Imagine if they open the envelope, whoever does it, Warren Beatty, Faye Dunaway, they may not be inviting them back, but let's say he opens it up and it's The Substance. Who do in the old days, I've won trivia competitions by guessing all the winners, right? All the categories. Yes. I have no idea anymore. Who do I think is going to win? I could see I'm Still Here, your favorite, winning, I could see Nickel Boys winning, and I could see a Nora winning.
No, I don't think.
Who you think the Brutalist is going to win?
I think there's a chance a Nora could win. I actually think a Nora voters and Brutalist voters will cancel each other out, and Conclave will win.
I forgot about. Did you even mention Conclave?
I was not trying to pull. I wasn't trying to pull what's he called? Cardinal. Who's the dodgy cardinal in Conclave?
I think they're all dodgy, but that's just
smoking
me.
cardinal. No, they're
the vaping.
Yeah, I think Conclave might win, and I'd like to see. I mean, I'd be delighted with that because the film with tremendously humane things to say to the world right now, and I'd like to see I'm Still Here win. What would you like to see?
I forgot about Conclave and Dune, Part 2. Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, yeah, Conclave will probably win. It's like the Academy favorite because people that vote for Nora and the Brutalist will cancel each other out. And I've said it twice already on the show. Challengers should be in there.
Challengers should be in there. All We Imagine Is Light, Joker, Folie à Deux, Robot Dreams, Sing Sing, Evil Does Not Exist, Rebel Ridge, and Small Things Like These.
I agree with everything you've said.
Other than those 10 that weren't nominated, this is a great list. And
what if next year they'll expand it to 20?
Are you going to watch the Oscars?
We could do a live stream. Do you want to do a live stream for the Patreon supporters?
I think I'm actually going to be at the Conclave.
I think I'll be hanging out.
I think actually, no, this is an idea. The Oscars should be, the best picture should be decided by a conclave.
I think it already is.
They're not allowed out until the right to use ranked order voting, the smoke. That's a suggestion. I know that many of the governors of the Academy listen avidly to the Film Talk, and that's our humble suggestion. And if you decide to use that, you don't even need to credit us. We're just happy to share good ideas for the sake of the good.
I don't know if that suggestion is going to increase ratings. We'll see what happens. Well, the listener, I hope you enjoyed the show. Gareth and I might live stream. I'm not sure where either one of us is going to be on the date, like what part of the country or which country or all that business. We'll see what we can do. Thank you so much for listening. Even though, of course, Gareth was wrong about I'm Still Here. Still worth watching. You're there in the hotel room. It comes on. Absolutely.
Thank goodness.
Watch it. It's important. Thanks for listening. I've been Jed Lowe.
I've been Gareth Higgins. We'll keep talking
next time.